The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Frogmore Cottage, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where Meghan sat with her laptop balanced on her knees. The California sunshine she had grown accustomed to seemed like a distant memory as she found herself back in Windsor for what was supposed to be a brief visit to handle some remaining royal obligations. Harry was upstairs, his voice carrying down the hallway as he spoke in hushed tones on yet another phone call with their legal team about ongoing media disputes. Meghan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she tried to focus on the charity proposal spread across her screen, but her mind kept wandering to the strange tension that had settled over their visit. Something felt different this time. The usual choreographed distance between the two sides of the royal family seemed to have shifted into something more uncertain, more unpredictable. She had noticed it in the way the staff looked at them during yesterday's brief appearance at a local charity event, the way conversations stopped when they entered rooms, the careful politeness that felt more strained than usual. The sound of footsteps on the graveled driveway made her look up from her work. Through the window, she could see a familiar figure approaching the front door with purposeful strides. James, one of the private secretaries from Kensington Palace, carried himself with the kind of formal bearing that usually meant official business. But there was something about his expression, a carefully controlled neutrality that set off alarm bells in Meghan's mind. She closed her laptop and smoothed down her cream-colored sweater, taking a moment to compose herself before answering the door. The relationships within the royal family had become so complicated, so layered with history and hurt feelings, that even the smallest interactions required careful navigation. Every gesture was analyzed, every word weighed for its potential to create new headlines or reopen old wounds. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," James said with a slight bow when she opened the door. "I apologize for calling so early, but I have a message from their Royal Highnesses the Prince and Princess of Wales. They've asked me to deliver it personally." Meghan felt her stomach tighten. Personal messages delivered through official channels were never casual family communications. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "Would you like some tea?" "That's very kind, but I won't stay long," James said, reaching into his leather portfolio. "Prince William and Princess Catherine have asked me to invite you and Prince Harry to join them for a private lunch next week. They've specifically requested that no staff be present except for basic security, and they've asked that the meeting remain completely confidential." The invitation itself wasn't entirely shocking. Family meals still happened occasionally despite everything that had occurred over the past few years. But the specifics of the request sent Meghan's mind racing. No staff meant no witnesses, no official record of what was discussed. Complete confidentiality suggested they had something sensitive to address. And the formal delivery method, rather than a simple phone call or text, indicated whatever they wanted to discuss was significant enough to warrant official protocol. "They've suggested next Tuesday at Adelaide Cottage," James continued, consulting his notes. 1 o'clock, if that works with your schedule." Princess Catherine mentioned she would prepare the meal herself, nothing formal. Meghan nodded slowly, her journalist's instincts immediately beginning to analyze every detail. Catherine cooking personally was unusual for any royal gathering, even informal ones. It suggested they wanted absolute privacy, no kitchen staff, no servers who might overhear conversations. The choice of Adelaide Cottage, their private residence rather than an office at Kensington Palace, reinforced the personal nature of whatever they wanted to discuss. "We'll need to check with Harry's schedule," Meghan said carefully, "but I believe we should be able to accommodate that." After James left, Meghan found herself pacing the cottage's small living room, her mind spinning through possibilities. The invitation could be an olive branch, a genuine attempt to rebuild family relationships that had been strained to their breaking point. But it could also be something else entirely. Given the complex dynamics that had developed over the years, nothing was ever straightforward in their interactions with William and Catherine. She thought back to their last significant conversation, nearly 8 months ago at the Queen's funeral. Even in the midst of grief and ceremony, she had felt the careful distance that everyone maintained, the way conversations stayed safely on neutral topics, the way genuine emotions were carefully managed and controlled. That day had reinforced just how much had changed since the early days when she and Catherine had shopped together, when family gatherings felt natural rather than orchestrated. When Harry finally came downstairs an hour later, his face still bore the tired expression that had become familiar during their recent legal battles with various media outlets. The constant pressure of defending their privacy while trying to build a new life had taken its toll on both of them, but especially on Harry, who carried the additional weight of his complicated feelings about leaving his family and his country. "You look worried," he said, immediately picking up on her mood as he settled beside her on the sofa. "What's happened?" Meghan explained the invitation, watching as Harry's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something that looked almost like hope. Despite everything that had occurred between the brothers, she knew Harry still harbored deep feelings about the relationship that had once been the foundation of his life. The bond between William and Harry had been legendary, two brothers united by shared tragedy and mutual support. The deterioration of that relationship remained one of Harry's deepest sources of pain. "Catherine wants to cook?" Harry asked, focusing on the same detail that had caught Meghan's attention. "That's not like them to be so informal." "That's what I thought," Meghan agreed. "The whole thing feels different from their usual approach. More personal, but also more serious somehow." Harry was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured gardens that surrounded Frogmore Cottage. These grounds held so many memories for him: childhood adventures with William, quiet conversations with their grandmother, moments of both joy and sorrow that had shaped who he became. Being back here always stirred up complicated emotions, the pull of family and tradition competing with his determination to build something different for himself and his own family. "Maybe they want to talk about the children," Harry said eventually. "Archie and Lilibet barely know their cousins. Perhaps they're thinking about the future, about how to handle family relationships as the kids grow up." It was a hopeful interpretation, and Meghan could hear in his voice how much he wanted it to be true. The estrangement between the adult family members was one thing, but the impact on the children was something that weighed heavily on both of them. Archie had been so young when they left England that he had few memories of his extended family, and Lilibet had never really had the chance to form relationships with her royal relatives. "Or it could be about the coronation logistics," Meghan said, trying to consider all possibilities. "There are still some unresolved questions about ongoing security arrangements and public appearances." But, even as she said it, she knew that kind of discussion would typically be handled through official channels, not over a private lunch with no witnesses. Whatever William and Catherine wanted to discuss required the kind of privacy and deniability that formal meetings couldn't provide. As the day wore on, Meghan found herself unable to shake a growing sense of unease. She had learned to trust her instincts about people and situations, and something about this invitation felt loaded with implications she couldn't quite identify. The timing was particularly curious, coming during a period when media attention on the family had been relatively calm, when it seemed like everyone had settled into their respective roles and territories. That evening, as they walked through the cottage garden in the fading light, Harry seemed lost in his own thoughts. She knew he was remembering other times when family meetings had been arranged with such careful discretion, times when difficult decisions were made or family business was discussed that couldn't become public knowledge. The royal family had always operated according to unspoken rules and careful protocols, but recent years had shown how quickly those traditions could shift when circumstances demanded it. "Are you nervous about seeing them?" Meghan asked as they stopped beside a small pond where swans glided across the darkening water. Harry considered the question seriously. "I'm always nervous about family things now," he admitted. "It used to be so simple, just being brothers, just being family. Now everything feels like a negotiation, like there are consequences to every word and every gesture." Meghan understood that feeling completely. In her previous life, family gatherings might be complicated by ordinary disagreements or personality conflicts, but they weren't typically analyzed by international media or used as evidence of larger political or social issues. The fishbowl existence that came with royal life meant that even private family moments carried public weight. "Whatever they want to discuss," she said, taking his hand, "we'll handle it together. We've gotten through everything else." But, as they walked back toward the cottage, Meghan couldn't shake the feeling that this lunch invitation represented something significant, a turning point or moment of decision that would have implications beyond just family dinner conversation. The careful formality of the delivery, the specific requests for privacy, the unusual personal touches like Catherine cooking, all of it suggested that William and Catherine had something important to communicate, something that required delicate handling. That night, as she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the English countryside, Meghan found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. The early days of her relationship with Harry felt like another lifetime, when the focus had been on love and possibility rather than protocol and public perception. She remembered the excitement of those first family gatherings, the warmth she had initially felt from Catherine, the sense that she was being welcomed into something special and historic. The transformation of those relationships into their current state of careful politeness and managed distance had been gradual but devastating. It wasn't that there had been dramatic confrontations or angry words, but rather a slow erosion of trust and comfort, a growing sense that different priorities and perspectives made genuine closeness impossible. As she finally drifted toward sleep, Meghan wondered what version of William and Catherine they would encounter at Tuesday's lunch. Would it be the formal, dutiful royals who had perfected the art of saying nothing while appearing gracious? Or would they catch a glimpse of the people behind the public personas, the brother and sister-in-law who had once felt like family? The invitation had opened a door to possibilities, but it had also raised questions that wouldn't be answered until they sat around Catherine's kitchen table and discovered what had prompted this unexpected outreach. Whatever lay ahead, Meghan knew it would require all the diplomatic skills she had developed during her time in royal life, along with the honest communication she had learned was essential for protecting her own well-being and her family's future. The next few days would be spent in careful preparation, thinking through responses to various scenarios, making sure she and Harry were aligned in their approach. But, beneath all the strategy and consideration, there remained a simple hope that this meeting might represent a genuine step toward healing some of the wounds that had divided a family that had once been united by love and shared purpose. The days leading up to Tuesday's lunch passed with agonizing slowness. Meghan found herself analyzing every interaction, every news report, every piece of royal coverage for clues about what might have prompted William and Catherine's invitation. She scrolled through social media, searching for any hints about recent developments in royal circles, but found only the usual mixture of speculation and admiration that followed the Wales family's public appearances. Harry seemed equally preoccupied, though he expressed it differently. He spent hours on long walks around the Windsor estate, often disappearing for the entire afternoon without explanation. When he returned, he would be quiet and thoughtful, clearly processing memories and emotions that he wasn't ready to share. Meghan recognized this pattern from other difficult periods in their relationship, Harry's tendency to internalize stress and work through complex feelings in solitude. On Monday morning, she decided to call her mother in Los Angeles. Doria's voice was warm and immediately comforting, a reminder that there were people in her life who loved her unconditionally, without the complicated layers of duty and protocol that seemed to define all royal relationships. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Doria asked, picking up on the tension in Meghan's voice within the first few sentences of their conversation. "I don't know, Mom," Meghan admitted, curling up in the window seat that overlooked the cottage garden. "We're having lunch with William and Catherine tomorrow, and I can't shake the feeling that it's going to be significant somehow. But I don't know whether that means good news or challenging news." Doria was quiet for a moment, considering her response in the thoughtful way that had always made her such a trusted confidant. "What does Harry think?" "He's hopeful," Meghan said. "He wants so badly for things to get better with his brother that I think he's seeing this as a potential turning point. But I'm not sure if that's realistic or if it's setting him up for more disappointment." "And what do you think?" Doria pressed gently. Meghan stared out at the garden, watching a gardener tend to the rose beds with methodical precision. Everything about royal life was so carefully maintained, so perfectly presented, that it sometimes felt impossible to know what was real and what was performance. "I think they need something from us," she said finally. "The formality of the invitation, the timing, the emphasis on privacy, it doesn't feel like a casual family gesture. It feels like they have something specific they want to discuss, and they need to make sure it happens in a controlled environment." After hanging up with her mother, Meghan felt slightly better but no less anxious about the approaching meeting. She decided to focus on practical preparation, choosing her outfit carefully to strike the right balance between respect for the occasion and comfort for what might be a difficult conversation. She settled on a navy blue sweater and dark jeans, appropriate for a casual family lunch but polished enough to show she took the invitation seriously. That evening, Harry finally opened up about his own concerns. They were sitting in the cottage's small library, surrounded by books that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, when he suddenly put down the biography he had been pretending to read. "I keep thinking about the last time William asked me to meet him privately," he said quietly. "It was right after the interview with Oprah aired. He was so angry, but also hurt in a way that reminded me of when we were kids and one of us had broken something that belonged to Mummy." Meghan remembered that meeting, though Harry had shared only limited details at the time. She knew it had been emotionally devastating for him, a conversation that had clarified just how differently the two brothers viewed recent events and family loyalties. "Do you think this is about the book?" she asked, referring to Harry's memoir that had been published earlier that year. The book had contained revelations about family dynamics and private conversations that had generated significant media coverage and, reportedly, considerable upset within the royal family. "Maybe," Harry said. "Or maybe it's about the Netflix series. Or maybe it's something else entirely that we don't even know about yet." The uncertainty was perhaps the most difficult part of the situation. In their previous royal life, they would have had some sense of the context for such a meeting, some understanding of current family priorities and concerns. But their distance from day-to-day royal operations meant they were often operating without crucial information about palace dynamics and decision-making processes. Tuesday morning arrived grey and drizzling, typical English weather that matched Meghan's uncertain mood. She spent extra time getting ready, not out of vanity but as a way to calm her nerves and feel prepared for whatever lay ahead. Harry was unusually quiet during breakfast, checking his phone repeatedly as if expecting some last-minute message that might provide additional context for the day's events. The drive to Adelaide Cottage took them through familiar Windsor roads, past landmarks that held decades of royal history. Meghan found herself thinking about all the family events that had taken place in these surroundings, celebrations and crises that had shaped multiple generations of the royal family. The weight of that history felt both comforting and overwhelming, a reminder that whatever happened today was just one moment in a much longer story. Adelaide Cottage appeared through the trees exactly as she remembered it, a modest country house that managed to feel both royal and surprisingly normal. Catherine's car was already in the driveway, and Meghan could see smoke rising from the chimney, suggesting that despite the formal invitation process, they had indeed tried to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere. William answered the door himself, dressed casually in a sweater and khakis that made him look more like a suburban father than a future king. His greeting was cordial but reserved, the kind of careful politeness that had characterized most of their interactions over the past few years. "Meghan, Harry," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming. Catherine's just finishing up in the kitchen." The house smelled wonderful, filled with the aromas of roasting chicken and fresh herbs that suggested Catherine had indeed prepared the meal personally. It was a gesture that felt significant, an investment of time and effort that indicated this gathering mattered to her beyond mere social obligation. Catherine appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel and looking slightly flushed from cooking. Her greeting was warmer than William's, though Meghan detected a nervousness beneath the surface friendliness. "I hope you're hungry," Catherine said with a smile that seemed more genuine than her husband's. "I may have gotten a bit carried away with the menu." They gathered in the sitting room for drinks before lunch, and Meghan was struck by how different this felt from their usual interactions at formal royal events. Without the presence of staff and photographers, without the structure of official duties, they were just two couples trying to navigate a complicated family relationship. The conversation during drinks stayed safely in neutral territory, discussion of the children's school activities, updates on various charitable projects, observations about the weather and current events. But Meghan could sense an undercurrent of tension, a feeling that everyone was waiting for the real purpose of the gathering to be revealed. When they moved to the dining room for lunch, Catherine had indeed outdone herself. The table was set with simple but elegant china, and the meal she had prepared was restaurant quality, clearly representing hours of effort. As they settled around the table, Meghan noticed that Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful look, some kind of silent communication that suggested they had planned how this conversation would unfold. "This is delicious," Harry said, taking a bite of the perfectly seasoned chicken. "You've really outdone yourself, Catherine." "Thank you," Catherine replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested her mind was on more than just the meal. I wanted today to be special. We've all been through so much over the past few years, and I thought it was time we had a proper conversation about where we go from here. There it was, Meghan thought, the acknowledgement that this lunch was indeed about more than family bonding. She felt Harry tense slightly beside her, preparing himself for whatever was coming next. William set down his fork and looked directly at Harry, his expression serious but not hostile. We asked you both here because there are some things we need to discuss privately, as family, before they become public or formal. Meghan's journalist instincts immediately went on high alert. Before they become public suggested that whatever they wanted to discuss involved information that would eventually be released or decisions that would be announced. The emphasis on family indicated that despite their current estrangement, William and Catherine still viewed this as an internal family matter rather than a political or institutional issue. The king has been reviewing various aspects of royal operations, Catherine continued, her voice carefully neutral. There are some changes being considered that would affect everyone in the family, including both of you. Meghan felt her stomach tighten. Changes that would affect them despite their distance from active royal duties could mean anything from security arrangements to financial support to their official titles and status. The fact that Charles was reviewing royal operations wasn't surprising. He had always been known for his desire to modernize and streamline the monarchy. But the implications for Harry and Meghan were unclear and potentially concerning. What kind of changes? Harry asked, his voice steady but guarded. William and Catherine exchanged another look before William continued. There's been discussion about clarifying the status of family members who are not working royals. The king wants to establish clearer boundaries about titles, responsibilities, and privileges. The words hung in the air like a challenge, though they had been delivered in a conversational tone. Meghan understood immediately that this was about much more than administrative clarity. This was about Harry and Meghan's ongoing connection to the royal family, their right to use their titles, their children's place in the line of succession, and their access to various royal privileges and protections. We wanted you to hear about these discussions from us, as family, before any formal announcements are made, Catherine added quickly. And we wanted to understand your perspective on how you see your relationship with the family moving forward. Meghan realized that this lunch had been carefully orchestrated as both an information session and a negotiation. William and Catherine were fulfilling their duty to keep family members informed about major decisions, but they were also trying to gauge Harry and Meghan's reactions and potentially influence their response to whatever changes were being contemplated. What specifically is being proposed? Meghan asked, her voice calm despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Nothing has been decided yet, William said quickly. These are preliminary discussions. But there are questions about whether it makes sense for family members who live abroad and pursue independent careers to maintain all the formal connections to royal roles and privileges. The implication was clear, though diplomatically stated. Charles was considering whether Harry and Meghan should retain their Duke and Duchess titles, their place in official royal documentation, their children's positions in succession, and other formal markers of their royal status. Harry was very quiet, processing this information in the careful way Meghan had learned to recognize when he was trying to control his emotions. She knew this conversation was hitting him at his most vulnerable point, his deep conflict between his love for his family and his determination to build an independent life. And what do you think? Harry asked his brother directly. What's your opinion about our status? It was a fair question, and Meghan admired Harry's courage in asking it directly. Whatever William's answer, it would clarify where the brothers stood with each other and whether there was any hope for rebuilding their relationship. William was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. I think, he said finally, that everyone deserves to be happy and to build the life they want. But I also think there have to be some boundaries about what comes with royal status and what doesn't. It was a diplomatic answer that managed to sound supportive while also defending the institutional perspective. Meghan could see the politician William was becoming, someone who had learned to navigate complex situations without fully committing to any position that might later prove problematic. The rest of lunch continued in this careful tone, dancing around the deeper implications of the conversation while maintaining the facade of family pleasantries. By the time they said goodbye, Meghan felt emotionally exhausted from the effort of reading between lines and managing her responses to information that would clearly require significant discussion between her and Harry. As they drove back to Frogmore Cottage, the silence between them was heavy with unprocessed thoughts and emotions. Meghan knew they both needed time to absorb what they had learned and what it might mean for their future, but she also knew that this conversation with William and Catherine was just the beginning of a much longer and more complicated process. Asking questions about our status, maybe we should figure out what arrangement would actually work best for us and our family. It was a strategic approach that would allow them to be proactive rather than simply reactive to whatever decisions were made for them. If changes were inevitable, perhaps they could influence those changes to create an outcome that served everyone's interests. I want the children to know their family, Harry said immediately. I want them to understand their heritage and their options, even if they ultimately choose different paths. And I want us to maintain the relationships that matter while protecting our independence, Meghan added. We've worked too hard to build our life in California to risk losing it to royal obligations we never wanted. They spent the rest of the evening talking through various scenarios, trying to imagine how different changes might affect their daily life, their work, their children's future, and their relationship with the extended royal family. It was an emotionally exhausting process, requiring them to confront questions about identity and belonging that they had thought were settled when they made the decision to leave royal life. The next morning brought a phone call that added new urgency to their discussions. It was Sarah, one of the few palace staff members who had maintained a friendly relationship with them despite their changed status. She spoke carefully, aware that phone conversations could be monitored, but managed to convey that formal meetings about royal family structure were scheduled for the following week. I can't say much, Sarah said, but I wanted you to know that there are some big discussions happening, and your names have come up. You might want to consider having representation at those meetings, or at least making sure your perspectives are heard before any decisions are finalized. After hanging up, Meghan felt a surge of determination that surprised her with its intensity. She had spent months trying to build a life separate from royal politics and palace intrigue, but the possibility that decisions affecting her family might be made without their input activated all her instincts for advocacy and self-protection. We're not going to be passive in this, she told Harry firmly. If they want to change our status, they're going to have to discuss it with us directly, not around us. Harry looked at her with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He knew that tone in her voice, the same determination that had driven her career success and their decision to leave royal life in the first place. When Meghan decided to fight for something, she fought with everything she had. What are you thinking? He asked, recognizing that she had moved beyond worry into planning mode. I'm thinking we need to stop being reactive and start being strategic, she replied. We need legal advice, we need to understand our options, and we need to decide what we're willing to fight for and what we're willing to give up. The transformation from anxiety to action felt empowering, a return to the proactive approach that had served them well during previous crises. Rather than waiting to see what decisions might be made about their future, they would take control of the process and ensure their voices were heard. And if they don't want to include us in these discussions? Harry asked. Then, we'll make sure they can't ignore us, Meghan replied with a smile that didn't quite hide her determination. We've learned a few things about managing media attention and public opinion over the past few years. As they began making plans for the challenging weeks ahead, Meghan felt a familiar mix of apprehension and excitement. She had never backed down from a fight when something important was at stake, and the future of her family was certainly important enough to warrant whatever effort would be required. The lunch with William and Catherine had been intended as a courtesy, a family notification of upcoming changes. But it had also provided valuable intelligence about palace thinking and timing that could be crucial in protecting their interests. Whatever came next, they would face it together and on their own terms. The week following their lunch with William and Catherine became a whirlwind of strategic planning and emotional preparation. Meghan found herself drawing on skills she had developed during her acting career and later activism work, the ability to analyze complex situations and develop approaches that protected her interests while maintaining important relationships. But this time, the stakes felt infinitely higher because they involved not just her own future, but Harry's heritage and their children's birthright. Their first call was to their legal team in Los Angeles, a conference that lasted nearly 3 hours and left them both mentally exhausted but better informed about their options. The lawyers explained the constitutional complexities surrounding royal titles and status, the precedents that might apply to their situation, and the limited legal protections available to family members who found themselves in conflict with royal institutional decisions. The reality is that most of these decisions are considered internal family matters rather than legal issues, their primary attorney explained over the secure video connection. The Crown has broad discretion over titles and roles, but any changes that affect your children's succession rights or your legal status in the UK would be more complex and potentially challengeable. Meghan took detailed notes throughout the conversation, her journalist training helping her organize the complex information into actionable intelligence. She was particularly interested in understanding the difference between voluntary relinquishment of royal privileges and involuntary removal, as the public perception and legal implications of those scenarios were quite different. "What we need to understand," she said to Harry after ending the call, "is whether they're planning to present us with a fait accompli or whether there's genuine opportunity for negotiation." Harry had been unusually quiet throughout the legal consultation, processing not just the practical implications but the emotional reality that his relationship with the royal family might be heading toward a formal, permanent rupture. Despite all their conflicts and difficulties, he had maintained hope that time might heal some of the wounds and allow for eventual reconciliation. "I keep thinking about what grandmother would have wanted," he said, staring out at the cottage gardens where he had played as a child. She always believed that family problems should be solved within the family, that public conflicts reflected poorly on everyone involved. It was a perspective that Meghan respected, even as she recognized that Queen Elizabeth's approach to family management had been shaped by different circumstances and different pressures than those facing the current generation. The media landscape, public expectations, and family dynamics had all changed significantly since the Queen had established many of the protocols and traditions that still guided royal decision-making. "Maybe we can honor that by trying one more time to have a direct conversation with your father," Meghan suggested. "Before this becomes about lawyers and public statements, maybe we should see if there's a way to address his concerns while protecting what matters most to us." It was a risk, potentially exposing them to pressure or manipulation that they might not be able to resist. But it was also the only approach that offered hope for preserving family relationships while addressing the institutional concerns that seemed to be driving these discussions. Harry was silent for a long moment, considering the suggestion. "He's been avoiding direct contact with us for months," he said finally. "I'm not sure he would agree to a private meeting, especially if these decisions are as far along as they seem to be." "We won't know unless we try," Meghan replied. "And if he refuses to meet with us, that tells us something important about where we stand." That afternoon, Harry drafted a carefully worded letter to his father, requesting a private meeting to discuss the family's future and their role within it. The letter struck a balance between respect for Charles's position as both king and father, and clarity about their need to understand and potentially influence decisions that would affect their children's heritage and their own status. While they waited for a response, Meghan began reaching out to trusted friends and advisors who might be able to provide additional insight into palace thinking and public sentiment. She was particularly interested in understanding how various scenarios might be received by the media and the public, as those reactions would likely influence royal decision-making. One conversation was particularly enlightening, with a former royal correspondent who had maintained good relationships across different factions within the royal ecosystem. Speaking on background, the journalist provided valuable context about the pressures facing Charles in his early reign and the institutional priorities that were driving discussions about family structure. "The king is under enormous pressure to demonstrate that the monarchy can be both modern and fiscally responsible," the correspondent explained. "Your situation has become symbolic of larger questions about what the royal family should look like in the 21st century." It was both reassuring and concerning to understand that their personal situation was part of broader institutional challenges rather than simply the result of family conflict. But it also meant that any resolution would need to address those larger concerns, not just their individual circumstances. "The question," the journalist continued, "is whether there's a way to structure your relationship with the family that satisfies the modernization agenda while preserving the family connections that everyone claims to want to maintain." Meghan found herself thinking about that conversation for days, trying to imagine creative solutions that might address everyone's interests. Could they maintain their titles but formally renounce any claims to public funding? Could they accept geographical limitations on their royal activities while preserving their children's succession rights? Could they agree to specific restrictions on commercial activities in exchange for maintaining other royal privileges? Harry's father responded to their letter more quickly than expected, but not in the way they had hoped. Instead of agreeing to a private meeting, Charles sent a formal response through his private secretary, acknowledging their request but suggesting that any discussions about family roles should take place through official channels with appropriate legal representation. "He's treating this like a business negotiation rather than a family conversation," Harry said, his disappointment evident as he read the letter aloud. "This isn't the man who used to write me long letters about finding my own path and following my passions." The formal response clarified that whatever was being planned had moved beyond the realm of informal family discussions into the territory of constitutional and legal process. It also suggested that Charles had been advised, probably correctly, that private family meetings could create complications for any official decisions that might need to be made. "Okay," Meghan said, absorbing this new information and adjusting their approach accordingly. "If they want to handle this through official channels, then we need to make sure we're properly represented and that our interests are fully protected." Their next call was back to their legal team, this time to discuss formal representation and whatever processes were being established to review their status. The lawyers recommended bringing in additional expertise, particularly specialists in constitutional law and royal protocol who could navigate the unique challenges of their situation. Within days, their quiet week at Frogmore Cottage had transformed into a command center for what was clearly going to be a complex legal and public relations challenge. Meghan found herself coordinating between multiple advisors while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life for their family. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were once again being drawn into exactly the kind of palace intrigue and media speculation they had left royal life to escape. But the stakes were too high to simply walk away, particularly when their children's future heritage and identity were potentially at risk. "Are you having second thoughts about any of this?" Harry asked one evening as they reviewed strategy documents and legal briefs that had taken over their dining room table. Meghan considered the question seriously. Was there a part of her that wished they could simply accept whatever decisions were made and move on with their independent life in California? Certainly, that would be easier in many ways, and it would eliminate the stress and uncertainty they were currently experiencing. "I'm not having second thoughts about fighting for our family," she said finally. "But I am thinking about what victory looks like and whether it's worth the cost." It was a crucial distinction. They could probably win legal battles and public relations campaigns, but at what cost to their relationships with Harry's family and their own peace of mind? And what would victory actually accomplish if it left them with formal titles but no genuine family connections? "Maybe the goal shouldn't be to preserve everything as it was," Meghan continued, thinking out loud. "Maybe the goal should be to create something new that works for everyone, including your father and William." Harry looked up from the constitutional document he had been studying. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that we've been approaching this as if we need to defend our current status," she said. "But maybe we should be proposing an alternative that addresses their institutional concerns while protecting what really matters to us." It was a shift from defensive to creative strategy, from trying to preserve the status quo to imagining new possibilities that might better serve everyone's interests. The more Meghan thought about it, the more it seemed like the kind of innovative approach that had the best chance of success. "We could propose a new category of royal status," she suggested, her excitement building as the idea developed. "Something that acknowledges our family connections and our children's heritage while also recognizing our independent life and commercial activities." Harry's eyes lit up with interest for the first time in days. "A hybrid model that gives us some protection and the children some connection to their heritage, but doesn't create conflicts with our other work." They spent the rest of the evening sketching out ideas for what such an arrangement might look like, trying to anticipate potential objections while creating something that felt fair and sustainable. It was the kind of problem-solving collaboration that had always been one of their strengths as a couple, combining Harry's understanding of royal traditions with Meghan's strategic thinking and creative approach to complex challenges. The next morning brought news that added urgency to their planning. Through their media contacts, they learned that palace sources were beginning to brief journalists about upcoming announcements regarding royal family structure. The stories were still vague, but they suggested that formal decisions would be announced within weeks rather than months. "We're running out of time for negotiation," Meghan said, reading the latest reports on her laptop. If they're already starting to manage media expectations, then they've probably made their decisions. It was a deflating realization, but also a clarifying one. If their input was no longer being sought for decision-making, then they needed to focus on protecting their interests and managing their response to whatever was announced. "Maybe it's time to stop trying to influence their process and start preparing for our own response," Harry said, reaching the same conclusion. "We can't control what they decide, but we can control how we react and what story we tell about our family's future." As they shifted their focus from prevention to response, Meghan felt a familiar sense of empowerment that came from taking control of their narrative rather than simply reacting to events beyond their influence. Whatever changes were coming, they would face them on their own terms and with their own vision for their family's future clearly articulated. The lunch with William and Catherine had been intended as a courtesy notification, but it had become the catalyst for a much larger conversation about identity, belonging, and the future of royal tradition in a changing world. Whatever the outcome, Meghan knew they would emerge with a clearer understanding of where they stood and what they were willing to fight to protect.